The billionaire's fiancé poured paint on the maid. Then the billionaire's next move shocked everyone. The paint hit her face before she even understood why. Red. Cold. Thick. Dripping down her cheeks, soaking into her uniform, pooling at her feet on the white marble floor she had just spent an hour cleaning. The maid didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood there, frozen, staring at the woman holding the empty can, the same woman who was about to marry the richest man in Charleston. Nobody in that mansion knew what was about to happen next. Not the guests upstairs. Not the staff hiding behind the kitchen door. Not even the woman with the paint can, smiling like she'd won something. Because the man who owned that house had just walked in through the front door. And he saw everything. Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, we tell real, heartfelt stories about love, loyalty, and the kind of justice that makes you believe in people again. Before we start, drop a comment and let us know, what country are you watching from today? Now get comfortable, because this is one of those stories you won't forget. Let's begin. The rain hadn't stopped in Charleston for 3 days, and Elena Brooks was grateful for the warmth of the Whitfield mansion, even if it wasn't hers to keep. She was 28 years old, a single mother to a 6-year-old boy named Tommy, and she had been working as a maid in the Whitfield household for almost a year. It wasn't a glamorous job. It wasn't even a job most people would want. But it paid enough to keep the lights on in the small apartment she shared with her son, and it came with something rarer than money: dignity, or at least the illusion of it on most days. Elena arrived every morning at 6, before the sun had fully risen over the Ashley River, and she left after the last light in the house went dark. She polished floors that cost more per square foot than her entire apartment. She ironed shirts that cost more than her monthly rent. And she did it all with a quiet pride that never asked for recognition, because Elena had learned a long time ago that recognition wasn't something life handed to people like her. You had to build your own. What do you think it feels like to clean a house you could never afford to walk into as a guest? The house belonged to Nathan Cole, a 32-year-old real estate and technology investor whose name appeared on business magazine covers more often than his own social calendar. Nathan had built his fortune from nothing, literally nothing, growing up in a small mill town in North Carolina where his father worked double shifts and his mother cleaned houses much like the one Elena cleaned now. Nathan never forgot that. It was the reason he insisted on paying his household staff nearly double the standard rate, the reason he knew every employee's name, and the reason he always said good morning to Elena like she was someone who mattered, not someone who was simply there. But Nathan wasn't often home. His business kept him traveling, New York, Dallas, sometimes overseas for weeks. And in his absence, the house belonged to someone else. Vanessa Hale. Vanessa was 29, strikingly beautiful, and engaged to Nathan after an 8-month courtship that had been splashed across every gossip page in the Southeast. She had grown up wealthy, the daughter of a hotel magnate, and she had never once in her life scrubbed a floor, washed a dish, or waited for a paycheck to know if she could afford groceries. To Vanessa, people like Elena were part of the furniture, necessary, forgettable, replaceable. From the very first week, Vanessa had made her feelings clear. She criticized Elena's work in front of guests. She left messes on purpose, just to watch Elena clean them. She called her the help instead of her name, even after Elena corrected her 3 times. Elena never fought back. She needed this job, too much. "You let her talk to you like that?" her coworker Denise asked one afternoon in the kitchen, after Vanessa had thrown a stack of folded towels onto the floor and demanded they be refolded because they didn't look right. "I let her talk," Elena said quietly, refolding the towels. "Because Tommy needs shoes for school. Because rent is due on the 1st. Because I don't have the luxury of pride right now." Denise shook her head. "One day, that woman is going to go too far." Elena didn't answer. She just kept folding. What Elena didn't know was that one day was coming faster than anyone expected. 3 weeks before the wedding, tension in the house had reached a boiling point that had nothing to do with Elena at all. Vanessa had discovered something: a woman's name in Nathan's phone, a series of late-night calls to a business partner named Claire, calls that lasted far longer than any business call should. Vanessa didn't confront Nathan. Instead, She let the suspicion curdle inside her, turning into something uglier every day, and like people often do when they're afraid to face the real problem, she looked for someone smaller to take it out on. That someone was Elena. It started small, a demand that Elena re-clean an already spotless dining room. An insult muttered under her breath as Elena passed. Then it grew. Vanessa began following Elena from room to room, pointing out flaws that didn't exist, testing to see how far she could push before Elena broke. Elena never broke. And that, more than anything, infuriated Vanessa. She won't even give me the satisfaction of an argument, Vanessa complained to her sister, Priya, over the phone. It's like nothing touches her. Like she thinks she's better than me. Maybe, Priya said carefully, you should worry less about the maid and more about why Nathan's phone is full of messages from another woman. Vanessa hung up on her. That evening, the Whitfield mansion was being prepared for the wedding rehearsal dinner. Painters had come earlier in the day to touch up the ballroom walls with a custom shade of deep red, matching the wedding's color theme. Buckets of leftover paint sat near the ballroom entrance, waiting to be hauled away. Elena was mopping the marble hallway just outside the ballroom when Vanessa found her. You missed a spot, Vanessa said, pointing to a section of floor that was, in fact, spotless. Elena knelt down anyway and wiped it again. Is there anything else you need, Miss Hale? Actually, yes. Vanessa's voice had an edge to it that Elena had learned to recognize as danger. I need you to understand something. This is my house now. My wedding. My life. And I am so tired of pretending I don't see you looking at me like you're judging me. Elena looked up, genuinely confused. I've never. Don't lie to me. Vanessa's voice cracked through the hallway, sharp enough that two other staff members peered around the corner. And that was the moment, the exact moment, that something inside Vanessa, some combination of jealousy, fear, humiliation, and rage that had been building for weeks, finally broke loose. Her eyes landed on the paint bucket sitting 3 feet away. Elena saw the shift in her expression too late. Miss Hale, wait. She didn't wait. The paint hit Elena square in the face, thick red streams running down her cheeks and dripping onto her uniform, staining the white fabric in seconds. For a moment, the hallway went completely silent. Even Vanessa seemed shocked by what she'd just done, the empty bucket still tilted in her hands. Have you ever watched someone make a decision they can never take back? Elena stood frozen, paint dripping from her chin onto the marble floor she had polished with her own hands just hours earlier. Her eyes stung. Whether from the paint or from something deeper, she couldn't tell. Behind her, she heard Denise gasp from the kitchen doorway, and somewhere further down the hall, a painter dropped a brush in shock. You humiliated me, Vanessa stammered, though her voice had already shifted from rage to something closer to panic, as if she was only now realizing the size of what she'd done. You were looking at me like... I was cleaning the floor, Elena said, her voice steady despite the paint running into her collar. That's all I was doing. Vanessa's face went pale. She looked down at the empty bucket in her hands like she didn't recognize it, like some stranger had placed it there. And that's when the front door opened. Nathan Cole walked into his own home 15 minutes earlier than expected, his suit jacket still on, his flight from Dallas having landed ahead of schedule. He'd wanted to surprise Vanessa, to steal a quiet dinner together before the rehearsal chaos began. Instead, he stepped into a hallway that looked like a crime scene, his fiancée standing over a maid covered head to toe in red paint. For 3 full seconds, nobody said anything. Nathan's eyes moved from the empty paint bucket in Vanessa's hands, to the streaks running down Elena's face, to the small crowd of staff members frozen in the doorway behind them, witnesses who clearly didn't know whether to intervene or disappear. What happened here? Nathan's voice was quiet. That was somehow worse than if he'd shouted. Vanessa's mouth opened and closed twice before words came out. Nathan, it was an accident. The bucket, it slipped, I was trying to move it and... Don't. The word came out of Nathan like a door closing. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He'd crossed the hallway in 4 long strides and was kneeling in front of Elena, paint be damned, his hands hovering near her face without quite touching it, as if he didn't want to make things worse. Elena, are you hurt? Did it get in your eyes? Elena blinked, startled that he knew her name without hesitation, startled that his first instinct was concern rather than damage control. I'm okay, Mr. Cole. It's just paint. It's not just paint, Nathan said, and something in his jaw tightened. He stood, turning to face Vanessa fully now. Tell me what happened. And I want the truth, not a story. The staff members in the doorway exchanged glances. Denise, usually the boldest of the group, took a small step forward. Sir, she said carefully, we saw it. Miss Hale poured the paint on her. On purpose. Vanessa's face flushed crimson. You don't know what you saw. Elena provoked me. She's been disrespectful for weeks, looking at me like I'm nothing, like... She's been cleaning your house, Nathan said, cutting through her excuses with a coldness none of the staff had ever heard from him. She's been doing her job. And you poured paint on her face like she was a piece of furniture you were tired of looking at. Nathan, please, you're overreacting. It's just paint. It washes out. It's not about the paint, Vanessa. His voice rose for the first time, and everyone in that hallway felt the temperature of the room change. It's about what it says about who you are. About what you think you're allowed to do to people who can't fight back. Vanessa's eyes welled with tears, but for once, they didn't seem to move Nathan at all. He turned away from her and back to Elena. Go home, he said gently. Take the rest of the week off paid. I'll have my driver take you, and make sure you get cleaned up. If you need anything, medical attention, anything at all, you tell me right now. I'm fine, really, Elena said, embarrassed by the sudden attention, painfully aware of the paint dripping onto the marble at her feet, aware of every eye in the hallway on her. I don't want any trouble. You're not the one who caused trouble, Nathan said. What none of them knew yet, not Elena, not the staff, not even Vanessa in her panic, was that this single moment in a paint-stained hallway was about to unravel far more than a wedding. Because Nathan Cole did not make decisions lightly. And by the time the rehearsal dinner would have started that evening, he had already made one that would change everything. That night, after Elena had been driven home and the staff had quietly mopped away the last traces of red from the marble floor, Nathan sat alone in his study with a glass of untouched scotch and a decision weighing on him that had nothing to do with paint. Because the truth was, the incident in the hallway wasn't really the beginning of anything. It was the final piece of a puzzle Nathan had been quietly assembling for weeks. What do you do when the person you're about to marry shows you exactly who they are, and you finally believe it? 3 weeks earlier, Nathan had noticed small things about Vanessa that troubled him. The way she spoke to waiters, dismissively, without ever looking at their faces. The way she'd once told him that people who worked menial jobs simply hadn't tried hard enough in life, as though effort alone explained every inch of distance between a mansion and a one-bedroom apartment. The way she'd casually suggested, more than once, that he should replace the sad-looking maid with someone more polished, someone who fit the image of the house better. At the time, Nathan had brushed it off as the kind of thoughtless comment people make when they've never had to struggle. He told himself people could grow, could learn empathy they hadn't been taught. He told himself Vanessa's coldness was a surface thing, something love could soften over time. He had wanted so badly to believe that, because believing otherwise meant admitting he'd built an entire future on a foundation that didn't exist. But Nathan Cole hadn't built a business empire by ignoring evidence. And the evidence had been piling up for weeks. He thought about his mother, Ruth Cole, who had cleaned houses in Gastonia for 11 years after his father's hours got cut at the mill. He remembered being 9 years old, waiting in the car outside some stranger's enormous house while his mother worked, watching through tinted windows as wealthy families walked past without a second glance at the woman scrubbing their floors. He remembered the exhaustion on his mother's face, the aching in her hands, the quiet dignity she carried anyway, never once complaining in front of him, never once letting him see how much it cost her. Nathan had built his entire fortune trying to make sure no one who worked for him would ever feel invisible the way his mother had. And tonight, his fiancée had made someone feel worse than invisible. She had made Elena feel like an object to be punished. Around midnight, his phone buzzed. It was Priya, Vanessa's sister. I need to tell you something, Priya said, her voice tight. And I probably shouldn't, because Vanessa's my sister, and I love her, but I can't watch this happen anymore. Go ahead. This isn't the first time, Priya said. She did something similar to a maid at our parents' house 2 years ago. Not paint. She spilled hot coffee on a woman's hands and told our parents it was an accident. I believed her then. I don't believe her anymore. And Nathan, the reason she's been so on edge lately isn't just stress about the wedding. She found out about your calls with Claire Whitmore. She's been building resentment for weeks, and I think today, some of that rage just came out somewhere she thought it was safe to release it. Nathan closed his eyes. Claire is a business partner. We're restructuring the downtown development deal. That's all it's ever been. I believe you, Priya said. But that's not really my point. My point is that my sister has a pattern of hurting people who can't hurt her back, and then finding a way to make the story about herself. I've watched her do it my whole life. I'm telling you this because I think you deserve to know who you're actually marrying before you say yes in front of 300 people. The call ended, and Nathan sat in the dark study for a long time, turning the day over in his mind. The paint, the excuses, the tears that seemed to switch on the moment consequences appeared, and switch off the moment they didn't. He thought about Elena's face, not angry, not vengeful, just quietly enduring, the way his mother used to endure. He thought about how Elena had said, "I don't want any trouble," even after being humiliated in front of a room full of people, because people who have very little often learn to make themselves as small as possible to survive. And he thought about the wedding, now 16 days away, 300 guests, a $500,000 venue deposit already paid. His mother, flying in from North Carolina, so proud that her son had found someone to build a life with. Everyone would understand if he simply moved forward. Everyone would say the paint incident was unfortunate, but people make mistakes and weddings are stressful, and surely it would never happen again. Nathan had built his entire life on refusing to accept the easy, comfortable lie. By 2 a.m, he had made his decision. Not the decision anyone in that hallway, least of all Vanessa, could have predicted. He picked up his phone and typed a single text message to his assistant. Cancel the venue. Cancel the caterer. I need to see the household staff contracts first thing tomorrow morning. And find out everything you can about Elena Brooks's situation. Rent, expenses, her son's school. Quietly. I want to help her, and I want to do it right. Then he opened his contacts and found Vanessa's name. He didn't call her. Not yet. Some conversations needed daylight and a clear head and the kind of courage that came easier in the morning. But before he went to bed, he wrote 4 words in the Notes app on his phone, words that would guide everything he did over the following 2 weeks. Show them who I am. The morning after the paint incident, Charleston society woke up to a very different kind of headline than anyone expected. It hadn't leaked from the mansion. It hadn't come from gossip. It came from Nathan Cole himself, who called his publicist at 7 a.m. and asked her to draft a short, honest statement, not for damage control, but because Nathan believed that if his name was going to be attached to a story, it should be attached to the truth. Effective immediately, my engagement to Vanessa Hale has ended. I will not go into details out of respect for everyone involved, but I want to be clear about one thing. How a person treats those who serve them says everything about their character. I built my company and my life on the belief that no one is invisible. I intend to keep living that way. What do you think it costs a man to walk away from everything the world expects of him? The statement went out at 9 a.m. By 10, it had been picked up by 3 local news outlets. By noon, a national business publication had run the story under the headline "Real Estate Mogul Cancels Wedding After Fiancé's Cruel Act Toward Household Staff." By evening, it was everywhere. Vanessa called him 17 times that day. He answered once. "You're destroying my life over paint," she said, her voice raw, somewhere between fury and disbelief. "Do you understand what you're doing to my reputation? To my family?" "I understand exactly what I'm doing," Nathan said. "I'm doing what I should have done the first time you called someone the help, instead of using their name. I stayed quiet too long, Vanessa. That's on me. But I'm not staying quiet anymore. She's a maid, Nathan. You're ending us over a maid." "No," Nathan said, and his voice was calm now, calmer than it had been in weeks. like a man who had finally set down something heavy he'd been carrying too long. I'm ending us because of who you are. Elena is just the reason. I finally saw it clearly. He hung up, and for the first time in months, he felt like he could breathe. Meanwhile, across town, Elena Brooks sat at her small kitchen table, staring at her phone, watching her name appear in a story that had gone viral without her permission. Tommy sat across from her, eating cereal, oblivious to the storm swirling around his mother's life. "Mama, why are you on the news?" he asked, squinting at a neighbor's phone that had been shared in their apartment building's group chat. "I'm not sure, baby," Elena said honestly. "Something happened at work, but it's going to be okay." She wasn't entirely sure that was true. Elena had spent her whole life avoiding attention, avoiding conflict, keeping her head down because that was the only strategy that had ever kept her safe. Now her face, red paint and all, captured by a staff member's phone before it was quietly deleted, though not quietly enough, was part of a national story about wealth and cruelty and consequences. She was terrified. Terrified she'd lose her job even though Nathan had promised otherwise. Terrified of the attention. Terrified, most of all, that this would somehow become another thing life did to her instead of for her. Her phone rang. An unfamiliar number. "Ms. Brooks? This is Nathan Cole's office calling. Mr. Cole would like to know if he could come speak with you in person, at your convenience, whenever works for you and your son." Elena's hands trembled as she agreed to a time. That afternoon, Nathan arrived at Elena's apartment building. Not in a limousine, not with an entourage, but alone, driving himself, wearing jeans instead of a suit for the first time anyone at his company could remember. He knocked on her door like any ordinary visitor, and when Elena opened it, he simply said, "I owe you an apology. Not on Vanessa's behalf. On mine. You didn't do anything wrong, Mr. Cole." "I let it happen for weeks before it got that bad," Nathan said, standing in her small living room, glancing at the modest furniture, the crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator, the life Elena had built with almost nothing. "I saw the way she treated you and the other staff, and I told myself it wasn't my business to interfere in every interaction. That was a mistake. Silence from people with power is its own kind of harm." Elena didn't know what to say. No employer had ever spoken to her like this, like an equal, like someone whose dignity mattered as much as anyone else's in the room. "I want to make this right," Nathan continued. "Not because of the news story. Because it's right. I'd like to cover any medical costs from yesterday, though I understand you weren't physically hurt. I'd like to give you paid leave for as long as you need. And I'd like to talk to you about your son's education if you're open to it. I've set up scholarship funds before for employees' children, and I'd like Tommy to have every opportunity, if that's something you'd want." Elena's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back since the hallway. "Why would you do all this? I'm just your maid." Nathan's expression softened, and for a moment, he looked less like a billionaire and more like the 9-year-old boy who used to wait in a car outside strangers' mansions. "You're not just anything," he said. "My mother cleaned houses for 11 years, so I could have a chance at a better life. Somewhere along the way, I promised myself that if I ever built something of my own, no one who worked for me would ever feel the way I watched her feel. Yesterday, I broke that promise without even realizing it because I let someone else break it for me. I'm not going to let that happen again." Elena wiped her eyes, overwhelmed, unsure how to hold both the fear and the gratitude flooding through her at once. "I don't need charity, Mr. Cole. I just need to be treated fairly. That's all I've ever wanted." "Then that's exactly what you'll get," Nathan said. "Starting now." Neither of them knew it yet, but that conversation in a small apartment kitchen was the beginning of something neither of them had expected. Not romance, not immediately, but the slow, careful beginning of mutual respect that would, over the following months, grow into something neither of them had believed they still had room for in their lives. 6 months passed. Charleston had mostly moved on to its next headline, its next scandal, its next dinner party story. But inside the Whitfield estate, renamed simply the Cole residence, after Nathan quietly changed it, wanting to shed everything that reminded him of that engagement, life had changed in ways no news article had captured. Have you ever watched someone rebuild their whole life from a single act of decency? Elena still worked at the house, but everything about her role had shifted. Nathan had promoted her to household manager, doubling her salary and giving her authority over scheduling, staff coordination, and vendor relationships, work that used her intelligence and organizational skill far more than mopping floors ever had. Denise, watching from the sidelines, once joked that Elena had gone from the maid nobody noticed to the woman who runs this entire house, and Elena had laughed, genuinely, for the first time in longer than she could remember. Tommy, now 7, attended a private academy on the scholarship Nathan had set up, not just for Tommy, but as a permanent fund for employees' children, something Nathan named quietly, without press attention, the Ruth Cole Fund, after his mother. Ruth herself had come to visit twice since the incident, and on her second visit, she'd sat in Elena's kitchen for 2 hours, the two women trading stories about the particular exhaustion of raising children while working jobs that never quite paid enough, and by the end of the visit, Ruth had hugged Elena like family. Vanessa, for her part, had moved to Atlanta after the engagement ended, taking a position at her father's hotel company. The scandal had cost her some social standing, though wealth, as it often does, cushioned most of the fall. Word occasionally reached Nathan through mutual acquaintances that she'd grown quieter, more reflective, that the public consequences had forced a kind of self-examination she'd avoided her whole life. Nathan hoped, without any bitterness left in him, that it was true. He didn't wish her ruin. He simply no longer wished her present in his life. As for Nathan and Elena, what grew between them grew slowly, the way real things usually do. It started with mutual respect. Then quiet conversations after long workdays, when Nathan would find himself lingering in the kitchen instead of retreating to his study. Then a shared laugh over something Tommy said. Then, one evening in early spring, Nathan asked Elena if she'd like to have dinner with him, not as employer and employee, but as two people who had somehow, against every unlikely odds, found something honest in each other. Elena had hesitated.
"People will talk," she said.
"They'll say I planned this, that I wanted this all along." "People talked when I called off my wedding too," Nathan said. "I stopped worrying about what people would say and started worrying about what was true. And the truth is, Elena, you're the most honest person I've ever known. I'd like the chance to know you better if you'll let me."
She said yes.
They took things slowly, carefully, aware of every complication their situation carried. Elena eventually stepped back from her household management role, not because Nathan asked her to, but because she wanted a foundation for their relationship that had nothing to do with his payroll. She enrolled in business courses at the local community college, something she'd dreamed about since before Tommy was born, and Nathan, true to the man he was trying to be, never once tried to rush or define what came next for either of them. A year after the paint had dripped down Elena's face in that marble hallway, Nathan stood in the same spot, now painted a soft cream color, the deep red long gone, and asked Elena to marry him. Not with 300 guests. Not with a $500,000 venue. Just Tommy, Ruth, Denise, and a small handful of people who had watched Elena's quiet strength carry her through the hardest year of her life. Elena said yes, tears streaming down a face that had once been covered in humiliation, now covered in something entirely different. At their wedding, months later, Nathan stood before their small gathering and said something that Denise would later repeat to every new staff member who joined the household, as a kind of unofficial welcome. "I used to think success meant being surrounded by the right people, the impressive people, the people who looked good in photographs," Nathan said, his voice thick with emotion, his eyes on Elena. "I learned the hard way that success means recognizing decency when you see it, even when it's covered in paint, standing in a hallway, refusing to let anyone make it small. Elena taught me that dignity isn't something you're given by other people. It's something you carry inside you, no matter what anyone pours on top of it." The room, small as it was, erupted into applause. Somewhere in North Carolina, Ruth Cole wiped her eyes and thought about 11 years of scrubbing other people's floors, and how strange and beautiful it was that her son had built a life honoring exactly the kind of person she used to be. And somewhere inside Elena, The little girl who had grown up believing she had to make herself small to survive finally understood a truth she would carry for the rest of her life. Sometimes the worst moment of your life is not the end of your story. Sometimes it's simply the moment everything true about you finally gets seen. If this story moved you, give it a like and subscribe if you'd love more stories like this one. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were Nathan, standing in that hallway? Would you have walked away too? Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that kindness always finds its way back around. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.